Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Hannibal Season 2, Episode 4, Takawase. Episode in a nutshell is just a brief reminder of what happened within this episode. So quite a bit happened within this episode. It starts slow with Will imagining himself teaching Abigail, whom he believes to be dead, how to fish. We then have Beverly visiting Will in his um, facility to give an update on the muralist, who happened to have, as Will stated in the previous episode, been sewn into his own painting. And he gives her basically some insight into the fact that while he was a serial killer, he worked alone, but whoever killed him was able to convince him to allow himself to become part of his art, meaning that he knew him well, but they wouldn't have had previous contact. And if he, of course, points her towards Hannibal as the suspect, which she's reluctant about at first, but again agrees to continue looking. We then follow a bee through the grass in nature until it arrives at a hive, and then we see it go through the hive and out the face of a dead person because the hive has grown into this person's head. We then have Will to try to get Hannibal further from himself because he's still obviously against Hannibal, if not directly to his face anymore. He tempts Chilton to stop talking about him with Hannibal in exchange for letting Chilton rummage through his head and being his exclusive psychiatrist. We then have Bella having a session with Hannibal where she's regretting letting Jack talk her into chemo treatments, as she feels that it's meaningless and that she just feels worse and she's only doing it for him, not for herself. And then Hannibal and her sort of talk about Socrates and how he had committed suicide in the, like, historically. And basically Hannibal kind of hints at how death isn't a defeat. We then move on to Jack, Jimmy, and Brian, who have arrived at the beehive and are examining it. And Jimmy really likes bees and starts to sort of spout some interesting bee facts while they take a look at the body on site. Meanwhile, Beverly's back at the lab and consults Hannibal on the muralist's body, revealing that she has a deal with Will to continue and keep looking. And Hannibal kind of gives her the advice to kind of look beneath and to find what's hidden. We then, of course, go back to Chilton, who now has started to treat Will, and he uses a medication and injects it into Will after getting him to sign a paper. This basically has Will concerned, talks about unorthodox practices, and Chilton advises that Hannibal also has indicated to him that he's fine with the unorthodox. But of course, it's perfectly legal what Chilton's doing because he has Will sign the form. And Will asks him if there are any medications that can interrupt memory. And Chilton says that there would be, but you'd have to have the proper knowledge, tools, etc. And when Will asks if Hannibal would have those, Chilton agrees that he could have. We then have Will being injected, and he basically has memories of seizure, flashing lights, and he basically takes a bit of a trip to the past where he sees himself being injected by Hannibal during the sessions. We then hear kind of like a muffled voice from Hannibal, draw the clock, and then he sees it change from a normal looking clock to his messed up clock. Hannibal sitting across from him, talking to him. Like I said, it's very muffled, but we essentially get to see Will having some seizures during sessions, brought on by Hannibal through light therapy and injections, which he never agreed to. When he comes out of his little trip, he informs Chilton of this fact. We then later have Chilton informing Hannibal that during Will's therapy, he unlocks some memories and he asks Hannibal about light therapy and whatnot, and points out that in the past season, he and Hannibal had had some conversations about psychic driving, and Chilton informs Hannibal that he believes that Hannibal has been psychically driving Will since they had met, which we as the audience know, probably true. We then have a little scene between Bella and Jack where they are smoking because she is a cancer patient. She's been giving medical grade weed to smoke, and Jack joins her, and she then informs him that she had written a DNR to the hospital or signed a DNR at the hospital. And they then discuss how her mom had also had lung cancer and what she went through as a child watching her mom go through that and how she doesn't want that to be her or how Jack remembers her. Then Jack tells her how he will remember her, and he brings up some very nice memories of their past when they met when she was healthy, saying that that's how he's going to remember her. We then return to the lab where it is discovered that the man who was turned into a beehive was given a lobotomy beforehand. And once they discover that, we then get to go and see the killer, Catherine Pims, lobotomize another patient while he's awake and conscious, aware of what she is doing. And then we see a little girl in a park approaching a man talking about how he can't look at the sun, it'll hurt his eyes. And then he basically turns around and his eye sockets are empty and obviously nothing's going on upstairs. They then basically bring him into the lab or a hospital room where, well, he's lobotomized, so he's just sitting there, might as well not be. And they shine a light in his eyes, see the marks from where the lobotomy tool was used. They also see that he has a lot of bee stings, but they happen to look like they are in a pattern. And when they look closer, they see that some of the marks were hiding needle marks on acupuncture points, which, when she hears about the bee stings hiding needle marks, inspires Beverly to look closer. She goes back to James the Mirrorless body and discovers that the stitches stitching him into his own artwork was hiding stitches from a surgery where she realizes that he has lost a kidney, or rather had a kidney taken from him. We then return to the prison where Will is laying in bed and he watches the scene in the dining room with Abel Gideon like he's watching a movie from the outside where he basically had a seizure. Hannibal did not care at all, continued a conversation with Gideon. Beverly then brings her findings about the missing kidney to Will, and he scolds her for involving Hannibal, but she points out that it's because Hannibal gave her the idea that she even thought to look for stitches hiding stitches, although the bee stings also gave the inspiration specifically for that as well. And then she basically says, well, if you're right and Hannibal is the bad guy, what is he doing with his surgical trophies? Will then flashes back to the stag head being mounted in the field and some crows, like carrion crows, eating on the body. And then he flashes back to having breakfast in the hotel room way back in season 1, episode 1, and comes to the realization that Hannibal is eating them. Which I thought he already knew he was a cannibal, so I'm surprised that this is the time that he's having the revelation. I thought he already had that. Apparently not. Anywho, we then have the FBI approaching Catherine's business to ask about her former patients, and without any prompting at all, she confesses everything that she's been doing because she's so proud of herself for giving them peace, quieting their mind, letting them give back to nature and die happily in a meadow because, they were in so much pain, suffering from illnesses, and, she's just such a great person. Wasn't what she did beautiful? And so basically, they found their person. We then have Bella returning to Hannibal. She gives him a coin as a debt payment, saying that he had helped her realize that death wasn't a defeat, but a cure, and then reveals that she had taken all of her morphine before coming to his office, and she did so because she didn't want to die at home or have Jack be the one to find her, and decided that she was going to die in Hannibal's office because that would have been great for his reputation and makes so much sense. Well, he waits until she passes out, then he flips the coin that he gave her, and assumption being, depending on what he chose or what way it landed, he would either let her die or bring her back. Either way, he does end up bringing her back with an injection from a medication he keeps in a cupboard in his office. Then we have Beverly going through the FBI looking for Jack, but she learns from Brian that he's at the hospital with Bella and Hannibal, that something had happened to Bella. We then go to the hospital where we see Jack comforting Bella, saying that he's there. Hannibal then walks in and puts the coin on the nightstand beside her, and she basically slaps him and tells him to get out because he obviously ruined her plan, didn't do what she thought or had hoped he would do, that is to say, let her die. We then see Beverly searching Hannibal's house while he's gone at the hospital. She starts going through the kitchen, picks the lock on his pantry, which is very fancy walk-in pantry. She then goes through his meat storage, sees like a vacuum sealed package that looks like it could be a kidney, then knocks over some wine. The wine, she notices, flows down and seems to disappear through the floorboards. So she then opens it, realizes that she's found the basement, goes through, realizes what she's seeing, turns on the light, is in shock because, oh my goodness. Then she turns around and Hannibal happens to be very creepily standing behind her. He quickly turns the lights off while making like a ziggy dodge motion, and she shoots at him, and we basically get left on a cliffhanger of going up to the dining room, hearing the multiple shots from below, and seeing one of those shots come out through the dining room floor, but are left in wonder of what may have happened. And that was this episode. Like I said, quite a bit happened. So now that we've been reminded about what happens within this episode, it is now time to rank the episode. As always, we rank on 2 ranking lists. We rank on our mostly objective ranking list, which is without emotion, but based on set values in a chart. And then the second list is the personal list, which of course is my opinion on the episode. All right, so our mostly objective rank values, I highlighted those I felt applied to this episode. First, of course, we have the killer of the episode, which was Catherine Pims, who didn't kill them, but quieted their minds to give them peace before letting them free into a meadow to die peacefully on their own. according to her. And she is worth 1 point. We then have our multi-episode supporting character development, which is with Bella. We see she hasn't really been seen for a while. Now we're seeing kind of the progression of her illness, how it has reached the point where she's in chemotherapy, her hair is starting to fall out, she's gotten weaker, she's talks about how she vomits all the time. So we've seen the decline in her health. And then we also, of course, have her attempt to take her own life via morphine. And that is worth 2 points. We then have our multi-season supporting character development, which is that Beverly finds the murder basement. Because we're left on a cliffhanger, I'm not counting the reasonable to assume outcome of that encounter, but we'll count the discovery itself as a development. That is something that she did. She did as Will asked, continued to look, found what Will wanted her to find, but was caught doing so. And that is worth 3 points. We then have our multi-season main character development, which of course is the fact that Will has started to recover his memories of Hannibal. And we could also say that Hannibal has been discovered as a development. But either way, both of those are worth 4 points on their own, which brings us to 10 points total for our positive side. But there were some negatives in this episode as well. Obviously, worth minus 2 points, we have our weak subplot concept. Now, the concept itself, arguably not bad. The bees, making a hive in someone's head is interesting. It is. But honestly, amid all of the different things happening in the main plots, between the main characters that are recurring, that we see frequently, it ultimately ends up being pretty forgettable. Kind of like the purpose of it being there was simply probably only for the moment where Jimmy mentions how the bee stings are hiding the needle marks from the acupuncture, and that gives Beverly her like epiphany and of inspiration to look at the stitches beneath the stitches, or the stitches hiding stitches. And apart from that, like, it didn't really need to be there. It didn't really have anything to do with the main plot. And like I said, amid all of the different things happening in the main plot, ended up being pretty forgettable. And then we have an additional minus 2 points for negative messaging or behavior, which of course is the suicide attempt that Bella undergoes. Obviously, it can vary depending on culture, depending on religion, how you feel about suicide as a concept. However, because my bias and judgment can apply to the the chart for the mostly objective rating, my religion, suicide is a sin. You will end up basically damning your eternal, immortal soul by doing it. I would never do it. I think it's very negative, especially when it is idealized as like a cure, especially in the way that they portrayed it as like an easy out to, a natural illness. It doesn't sit well with me, makes me uncomfortable. I don't like the concept as a whole. Don't think anyone should ever do it. That is why it's negative messaging or behavior. And that leaves us for this episode with a total of 6 out of 10 for the mostly objective ranking. And so to remind us of our season 2 rankings so far in the mostly objective ranking, in first place we had Kaiseki, then we had Hasun, Sekizuke, and now we have Takiwase. All right, so for my personal ranking, this of course is based purely on my own personal opinion. And as I mentioned, on the mostly objective, personally, I do not believe in suicide. I do not think that it is ever an option. And for me, just on balance, I wouldn't risk it. You know, if there's any religion out there that's saying this is a bad idea, you're going to end up with eternal suffering after death by doing it, I would hedge my bets and just say, you know what? I'm not going to risk it. Because there is nothing that could be so horrible in this life, if you have like a normal life, so horrible in this life that would be worth eternal suffering for eternity after the fact. I just, it's not for me. Wouldn't risk it. So I'm not a fan of that aspect of the story. Obviously, cancer is a terrible disease. Chemotherapy, personally, not a fan of it. It does terrible things to your body in the name of treatment, but it's like you've destroyed your body so much by this point by taking that poison into your veins that even if it cures your cancer, like you're probably going to be ill by something else just from the after effects of the treatment itself. Of course, it's everyone's personal decision, but not a fan of that. Personally, probably from the privilege of not having the disease at this point, would say I wouldn't. Like a spot radiation or a surgery to remove the cancer, that I would do, but I don't know that I would ever actually. I think I would have gone with Bella's original path, which is that she wasn't going to go the route of chemotherapy, but she let Jack, her husband, talk her into it. And when she's talking to Hannibal, she specifically even says, like, she's only doing it for him. And I feel like for something like that, you should do it for yourself. And if you don't believe in it, you probably shouldn't do it. So I didn't really like how it was kind of Jack pressuring her to get all these treatments, even when they're having their conversation, when they are smoking together. They he's like talking about, "Oh, I found this new treatment here. I found this treatment." And she's kind of like, "Look, I saw my mom go through these horrible things. This isn't what I wanted for myself." And, he's not really hearing that. And that doesn't really sit well with me. It's like it's always a personal choice, but if the person who actually is undergoing the treatment or has the disease is saying, I don't want this, then I do think Jack should respect that. And I do think like she should stand up for herself too. If she really doesn't want to go through these treatments or be in this state, that's her choice to make. And then she did try to make that choice. But again, she made it in a kind of dumb way because, like, what did she think was going to happen? You've gone to this doctor to basically die with a witness, but it's like, do you not think any repercussions would come on him for that? Like, if he had actually just sat there looking at her die, like, reputationally, probably not great. His relationship with Jack, probably not gonna be great. I'm pretty sure, like, he had to do something. Like, I don't think you can just go into a random business, sit, like, especially like a healthcare provider's office, sit down and be like, so I've decided to take these drugs and this morphine and just sit there and do nothing while I pass on. It's like the DNR was with the hospital, it wasn't with Hannibal. So honestly, I think Hannibal made the right decision, not for the right reason. He did flip a coin. Probably should have just revived her without the coin flip, but it's Hannibal. So what are you going to do? However, apart from that whole plot line, we then had our kind of neutral, forgettable B plot line, which again, I liked the concept of, though because of the episode it's in and how much other information we're getting and other things are happening to the characters that do recur long term, it obviously is kind of it got overshadowed. So I feel like if it had been like season one in those earlier episodes, like where we had our mushroom episode, if we'd followed that up with the honey episode, I feel like it would have fit in more there because there was more focus on the crime scenes and the investigations in those early episodes to kind of establish the premise. But now that we're deep more into the drama between like the recurring characters and the will against Hannibal, Will being framed in prison, all of this stuff, it just got overshadowed, and they weren't able to give it the screen time to make it not be overshadowed. Though, to be honest, it was pretty simple. I mean, they walk in and she basically just gave everything up, which was funny because it was completely unprompted. She was just like, hey, come in. They're asking about these patients, and there's no trying to get away with it, no trying to be like, yes, I treated them. So sad to hear about what happened to them. It's like, no, yeah, I treated them. Here were their diseases. Here's why I did it. Here's how I did it. Here's how I think of it. Here's my perception of it. Wasn't it beautiful? Just completely giving up. I love that Will is recovering his memories, especially because, honestly, the scene where Will has a seizure while Hannibal and Abel are talking is one of my favorites. I don't know why I find it so funny, but it just really amuses me when Will's there. He has his freak out about like thinking he's alone, thinking he's with Garrett Hobbs. Hannibal telling him he's alone, but Abel's just sitting there watching this whole thing go down. Sees Will starting to seizure. Hannibal mentioning how it's a mild seizure, and Abel being like, "Are you gonna do anything about this?" And Hannibal being like, "I said it was mild. Like, why would I do anything about that?" And then they have like a conversation at the dinner table while like Will's just standing there. I don't know why it amuses me so much. It shouldn't, but it does. And so I liked revisiting that scene in particular. And then, of course, the cliffhanger was really well done. It left us in suspense while at the same time also knowing what is going to happen. And not just because we're rewatching this, but because genuinely you would know what happens. I mean, it's Hannibal. You've got an entire season still to go, even if it wasn't renewed for a third one, you still have all the rest of the second season. So, of the two characters, you know which one's going to be kept around. And so they leave you on a cliffhanger where you can anticipate the ending, but if it's your first time watching, you may not know, or you're rather excited to see how exactly it's going to be continuing. I know I am, which we'll talk about it probably next episode, most likely. Which brings us now to the overall ranking, which I gave it a 7 out of 10 personally. Like I said, there were some negatives. 2 of the plot lines I wasn't overly fond of, but the other plot lines were really good, and that is why it got all the way up to a 7. We then, therefore, have our season 2 rankings so far. In first place, we have Hassan. Second, Kaiseki. Third was Sakazuke. And then in fourth place, we had Takawase. And yes, I am aware that I'm probably mispronouncing those, but as I don't know what the proper pronunciation is, I am just saying them how they are spelt, sounding them out. That now brings us to our final series ranking so far, where we are ranking each of the seasons against each other, and on our mostly objective side, we have season 1 ending with 83.85%, and season 2 so far has a score of 29 out of 130. Then on the personal side, we ended season 1 with 66.92%, and season 2 so far has a total of 33 out of a possible 130. And with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Hannibal season 2 episode 4, Takawase. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.